The reality of the situation is when a company signs a contract with the Department of Defense, they become a target for nation state actors. 70% of the defense industrial base is small businesses. And these companies are directly in the sights of nation state backed actors who are trying to steal their proprietary information, their intellectual property, DoD sensitive information to not only undermine our national security, but it also undermines our economy because they're stealing our research and development. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm well. Your background is so much cooler than mine. I put out our Legos and our rubber ducks, but it's still not enough.
I thought they actually were there fish in the fishbowl. So
It's rubber ducks. It's a reminder that we have to get above water.
it's a struggle, but yeah,
Yeah.
thankful for you making time. I know you typically are protecting the nation's secrets, so make
Well,
time
it's
for
a
little old
team
me. I
sport.
appreciate
You're
it.
part of it. We can't, get folks to enroll in our services if people don't know about them. So we always appreciate everything folks like you can do to help us get the word out. And
Absolutely agree. It's a team sport. Everyone has a role to play in this ecosystem.
how long
Absolutely.
have you been around the DIB?
Since I was 18, joined the Army
Oh,
right out of high school. Served 4 years, then I served as a defense contractor for almost 4 years in Iraq and
nice.
Afghanistan. So
Well, thank you for your service.
it was a pleasure.
I started when I was 17 through a program called the High School Work Study Programs, and I was at NSA for 15 years, not 15, almost 15, which is crazy. And I left for a couple years and was a contractor as well, came back, so kind of similar stories.
Wow, awesome. So Bailey, you are the chief of DIB security at the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center. Did I get that right?
That's right.
Awesome. Nice.
It's a mouthful, so good
It's a
job.
tongue twister. I'm practicing. Now, I kind of already touched on it a little bit, but I'm curious, how did you get first started in government service, especially at the NSA? That's an exclusive club. So,
Oh, we try not to be too exclusive. We're hiring. So I started in 2009. I was a high school work study. So it's a phenomenal program. I don't think enough people know about it, but they'll take students and they'll clear them their junior year in high school. So your senior year, you get to work in the NSA, whether it's at NSA Washington or one of our cryptologic centers. But it's just such a cool experience to get exposed to kind of national security information at that age. I personally found it was easier to get a clearance that young. I was like, I didn't have a driver's license.
don't have
like
much baggage yet. Definitely.
yeah, not too much. And so that's how I got started. I always kind of worked in technology organizations here at NSA and around cybersecurity, and was really fortunate to be the chief of cybersecurity communications as the directorate was kind of standing up and growing throughout its first couple years. I think was just really fortunate from there to be able to pivot into this role where I get to work a little bit more closely with all of our partners outside.
That's great, because when you think of the NSA, National Security Agency, for those who don't know, you think more of not being able to interface with the public and doing just spy missions in various countries. But in your role, you
Yeah.
get to interface with the DIB. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
I enjoy it. There's a lot of introverts here, but I think in cybersecurity specifically, by the nature of our mission, there's a lot of people that are really forward leaning and at conferences and talking to other people, and you just might not ever know, they work at NSA, but they do.
So can you tell us more about the mission for the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center? So CCC.
Yeah, sure. It's really a couple different things. First, NSA is a foreign signals intelligence agency, obviously. So we have really interesting insights on what nation state actors are doing in foreign space, what kind of malware they're using or what vulnerabilities they're exploiting. But we rightly lack any kind of domestic insights into how these actors might be operating across the networks we care the most about. For example, a defense contractor. So I think that there was a desire to really do three things. First, we need to get after these actors who might be leveraging US-based infrastructure to kind of obfuscate their activities and evade detection. Second, we have all these cool insights, actionable insights. We need to get those to industry so that they can use them to not only protect their own networks, but protect the networks of their customers and protect sensitive DoD information that's sitting on those networks. And then I think the third thing that is really important to us at the CCC is simply a matter of scope and scale. The cyber problem is so big, it's not going to be, the government doing one thing and industry doing something else and our international allies, doing something different, but really to get after the scope and the sophistication of our adversaries, particularly the People's Republic of China. It requires all of us coming together, shared priorities, shared resources to get in front of it.
Cool. So in the context of the DIB, so the Defense Industrial Base, I know that you all offer free cybersecurity services. I know our clients' ears always perk up when they hear free, especially for the small businesses. What are those services?
There's 3 right now that are really mature. Protective Domain Name System, or PDNS, Attack Surface Management, and Threat Intelligence Collaboration. And I'm happy to do a deep dive into what each of those are as we go. But I think that importantly, DoD has paid for these services, so they cost someone something, but not our customers. And the barrier for entry is intentionally set really low, and companies simply need to have an active DoD contract or access to non-public DoD information. So, for example, CUI, controlled unclassified information. And if a company can come in and say, we've met these criteria, then we'll let them in the program.
Seems pretty straightforward. I know recently I had referred one of our clients to you all, and I was impressed by how quickly they were able to complete the intake process and get up and running. Can you talk to us more about what that intake process entails?
Yeah, we have such a great team of folks working this. I love when I get to shout them out. So the intake process is really simple. There's a web form. If you go www.nsa.gov/CCC, scroll about 2/3 down the page, you'll see a button that says click here to get started. And we're simply going to ask for information like obviously your company name, a point of contact, and then something like a cage code that we can use to validate the status of that DoD contract. From there, it's usually very simple. We have a team of folks that do the onboarding and will answer any questions that the company might have. We do give them a non-disclosure agreement to sign, which is really powerful because it protects the identities of both parties involved. It protects the information being shared one to another. So yeah, it's pretty simple.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. And I've been on the website and it's easy to navigate. So certainly applaud your team for that, because I've been on other government agencies' websites where it's very challenging. Like, where do I go? Where do I start? What do I do?
Funny.
It can be overwhelming.
My background is in communications and public relations. And when I took this job and I saw the website, I was like, the first thing we're doing is fixing that. Yeah. So a huge shout out to our partners in NSA Public Affairs and the web design team and strategic comms, because they really helped us give that a facelift.
That's great. Now, we know the defense industrial base, defense contractors, subcontractors, that's who these services are aimed towards. And you mentioned that DoD pays for these services. It already answers my question, but I do want you to elaborate a little more on it. Is why the DIB? Are there other federal contractors that you all can support?
Yeah, let me take your first question and answer that one. Why the DIBs? Unfortunately, the reality of the situation is when a company signs a contract with the Department of Defense, they become a target for nation state actors. And when most people think about the defense industrial base, they think about these large primes, but in reality, 70% of the defense industrial base is small businesses. And these companies are directly in the sights of nation state backed actors who are trying to steal their proprietary information, their intellectual property, DoD sensitive information to not only undermine our national security, but it also undermines our economy because they're stealing our research and development, right? And so, we don't expect a small business to take on a nation state actor alone. So from that perspective, it really makes sense for NSA and the Department of Defense to engage just to ensure that commercial component is being used in a weapons platform or classified network or in the battlefield. We want to make sure that's protected full stop, right? And so that's kind of why we've leaned forward here. Not to be like a boring government wonk for a second, but the United States approach to cyber is we have 16 critical infrastructure sectors, and each sector has a sector risk management agency, and the Department of Defense is the sector risk management agency for the DIB. As a combat support agency, NSA is able to engage directly with the entire DIB ecosystem to support DoD in that effort and really kind of close up some of the holes that we're seeing there.
Okay, that makes sense. And I've heard the analogy before where, like, when you're talking about small businesses trying to defend against nation states, you have Pop Warner team versus NFL. It's just not a fair fight.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it is discouraging when you see, especially some of these large organizations like cloud service providers who have become victims of nation state actors. It's like, wow, what does a small defense contractor do?
Right.
How are they supposed to compete? You have those organizations spending billions of dollars. And I know prior to starting Inspire Cyber, I worked for Bank of America. They publicly announced they spend over $1 billion per year in cybersecurity defense. They still have incidents. So it is a challenge.
It is. But to your point, I want to kind of pull the thread on something and talk a little bit about something else that we're trying to do that maybe some small businesses don't even realize. So within the CCC, we also have a team that is really intentionally forming analytic partnerships with these companies that service the DIB. So, at the end of the day, we're all relying on, the same subset of core technology providers like cloud providers or endpoint companies, cybersecurity companies, ISPs. And so what we're also doing is while we're providing these cybersecurity services at no cost, we also have these really robust relationships with these major companies where we can share our insights on nation state actors and they can then defend against them. And I think that's really important because those smaller companies are benefiting from that because the larger players can update their products to be more secure. They can cascade out detection or mitigation techniques, and all of that is transparent to the small businesses and even the individual consumers, but I think it makes a huge impact.
Absolutely. And ties back, you started off with our conversation about it being a team sport.
Yeah.
It really is. Also, you mentioned earlier about either the services they can apply to either defense contractors, subcontractors, or those organizations with access to CUI. Can you elaborate more about what organizations would fall into that category where they're not a contractor, but they have access to CUI?
I can elaborate. Some consulting firms, for example, have access to DoD information or insights. And the other thing is that, across the entire DoD, different co-coms or elements do their contracts different ways. Think about like maybe a transportation company that's providing, a quick response in areas of conflict. And so I think what we're really trying to get after there is like, if you are supporting DoD, we can work with DoD to validate that and figure it out, even if your company is not showing up in like a formal government contracting database. There's a relationship there. We're going to try to work through that on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. What comes to mind for me is all of the managed service providers, managed security service providers who are supporting defense contractors. So they have direct access to their systems.
And that's actually a really great example and one that was probably more clear. We do work with managed service providers on behalf of the DIB, and we have those relationships established. Absolutely.
Awesome. It's good to know.
Yeah.
One big family. Now, the three services you mentioned, how did the NSA decide on those three services to really mature and offer to the DIB?
Yeah, good questions. I'll take it, one by one. Protective DNS, and sorry, this might be familiar for some, but it might not for others. So I always try to explain things, domain name system, an internet protocol that was built back in the day. And it's essentially just what allows me to type in, nsa.gov into my browser, and that redirects to the appropriate machine readable IP address. And because DNS was built so long ago, it's a little insecure. So NSA, we frequently see adversaries using DNS as a way to gain initial access to sensitive systems, install malware, and even do data exfil through. Really, with each of these services specifically, we said, what are the top ways the nation state actors are exploiting the DIB? And then what are low cost ways to defend against that? And that's how we came up with the suite of three. So protective DNS, it really just blocks users from connecting to known malicious or suspicious domains on the internet. And I'll talk more about that later. Attack surface management, this one I think is wildly interesting. So, in the National Vulnerabilities Database, there's more than 175 vulnerabilities that have ever been published, that these are publicly known, they're out there, right? But less than 2% of them have ever been exploited by anybody, whether it's a nation state actor or ransomware crew, whatever. And so, if you're a small business trying to keep up with that amount of vulnerabilities and patching and mitigation efforts, that's a lot. And it's impossible to keep up with. But yet, exploitation of internet facing publicly known vulnerabilities is one of the top ways we see nation state actors exploiting the DIB, again, because it's quick, it's easy, it's cheap, and it's effective, because these orgs can't possibly keep up with almost 200,000 vulnerabilities, right? So for attack surface management, we're really looking at how do we help companies prioritize what they're patching when, so we're constantly staying a step ahead of the adversary. And then the final really mature service, threat intelligence collaboration, really just, again, knowing that NSA has these insights on what nation state actors are doing in cyber, making sure we get those down to the unclassified level and sharing them directly with companies so that they have actionable information to protect their networks is key.
That's great. And I've certainly seen the effort within federal government to be more open about sharing intelligence. Important. I attended an NSA webinar probably a couple months ago, and they mentioned some additional services that you all offer that may not be as mature or more advanced. Can you talk to some of those services?
Yeah, we're fortunately able every year to pilot new services to just make sure we're constantly staying ahead. And so this fiscal year, we have 4 pilots running where these are short scoped in terms of size and participation, but we're really looking at, is this effective in stopping the exploitation we're seeing? Is it scalable, meaning low cost and also low touch on the end user for these companies that don't have a lot of resources? So for going right now, we're looking at things like spear phishing protection, cloud security, autonomous penetration testing, etc. And, at the end of the year, we'll do an evaluation and determine, okay, do we roll this out as a fully sustained service, or, are we going to divest of it?
Sounds exciting.
Yeah. It's busy.
You mentioned that once a company becomes a defense contractor, kind of by default, they're a target of potentially nation states. What are some ways that the NSA is seeing that these nation states are targeting or even finding out this company is a defense contractor? I know oftentimes the defense contractor, they're going to be proud and mention it on LinkedIn. So I know that's a rich source.
Yeah,
What are
that's
some
so
other
true.
ways?
Yeah, that's so true, but no shade. I'm on LinkedIn. So,
Me too.
yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of different ways, but, just as one example, we in C5 procure commercially available capabilities to do supply chain illumination on various DoD primes and DoD contracts and weapon systems. We can use that to validate the status of a DoD contract. We can use it to enumerate supply chains of the weapon systems we care the most about. But certainly anybody could use those capabilities for nefarious purposes as well. There's a lot of information out there on the internet. And so, there's a lot of different ways that they're doing that, and they're able to.
Easy to find them.
Mhm.
But I just think that's the point I always try to reiterate, especially to the small defense contractors. You are a target of a nation state at that.
Think about when you go to a conference and then I've been offered by conference vendors, will you buy my attendance list? And I'm like, absolutely not. But, if you attend a DIB conference, like, your information could be sold and shared. And so there's a lot of ways that I think that stuff gets out there and people lose control, or, when they go to a conference and they're scanning their badge, like, you're out there.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. That's a good point. Is that really a valid concern for defense contractors when they're at these conferences, as far as knowing who's legitimate potential business prospect versus someone who's trying to mask their activities?
This is what I will say. I think you're scratching on something which is key, and that's I go and I give a lot of these talks at conferences, and it's funny because when I talk about, nation state actor targeting, I see people's eyes glaze over and I'm like, no, I swear you really have to worry. And when you talk more about like compliance and winning contracts, people lean forward and they start taking notes. But at NSA, before we go to these big conferences, we get briefs by our operational security office, and they're in depth and they talk about here's the things you should, be worried about. And I think that's probably, a best practice for everyone to think about is what is my operational security? What is my footprint? How am I being mindful of what I'm posting, what I'm saying, who I'm talking to? That's always really important.
Absolutely. The number one question I get from clients that's working in the DIB, and when I tell them about the free services for NSA or CISA, number one thing they want to know, how does it satisfy CMMC? And I'm sure you get that a lot. How do you respond to that question?
CMMC. So a couple different things on that. First, CMMC maps back to NIST 800-171, obviously. And so while CMMC is in rulemaking, we have been careful to map our services back to NIST 800-171. And they do satisfy NIST 800-171, or I should say they support NIST 800-171 controls. Enrolling in our services is not a one-stop shop for compliance, but we do want people to know that it will help, and we're not trying to ask them to do anything in addition to what is already written into contract requirements. Rather, we're trying to help offer threat-informed solutions at no cost to help them meet at least a few of those requirements. I'm happy to get into the specific details more in depth if that would be helpful.
Sure.
Just for example, protective DNS, which is really monitoring that outgoing traffic to, web domains and blocking it if it's known to be bad. That supports NIST 800-171 Control 3.14.06, which is to monitor organizational systems, including inbound and outbound traffic to detect attack. Attack surface management support NIST 800-171 Control 3.11.02, which is to scan for vulnerabilities in systems, and then 3.11.03, which is to remediate vulnerabilities found. But this is where it's really key. We can help do vulnerability scanning. We can flag vulnerabilities and say, hey, this is under active exploitation by this nation state actor, this ransomware crew. But we need the companies on the other end to be the ones that actually remediate that do the patch. So it really is a partnership. And then threat intelligence collaboration supports Control 3.14.03, which is to monitor security alerts and advisories and take action in response.
Since I get that question so often, I had recently did a similar kind of mapping showing NSA and then also CISA service and showing how they map to NIST 800-171. But one thing I also pointed out in that map that it may satisfy some of the practices and assessment objectives, but not all of them. There's always going to be that shared responsibility, which you mentioned as well. In regards to remediation, so once you all identify, let's say, a vulnerability and notify the defense contractor, what role do you all play as far as supporting them throughout the remediation? Because we know a lot of small businesses, they may not have the IT expertise on staff to actually remediate. It's one thing to know that you have a vulnerability, but it's nothing to actually remediate it.
It's a great question. We do provide links to mitigations guidance. And what we try to do is we will offer like very substantive mitigations guidance, but also we'll try to apply some of our own analysis and create executive summaries to just help folks that might not have that deep expertise through. We are not going to go into their network, obviously, and perform that actual remediation for them. But what we can do if we found, a really high severity vulnerability in, an internet facing asset is we can offer a reassessment. We'll do another vulnerability scan. If the customer says, okay, I think I've fixed this, but I really want to make sure, we can kind of help them validate that.
Coming back to, it's not a one-stop shop. It's not a hand it off to NSA and we're good to go.
And you said it earlier, but some of these major companies, get compromised and stuff like that. Cyber's hard. We're here to help, but it's never going to be like a one-stop. There's not an easy button, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. Everyone's looking for that easy button.
Yeah.
Like I said, cyber definitely is hard. As far as the services y'all offer, at any point will there be fees associated? And I'm not sure if this is a rumor or not, but one of the DIB companies that I've worked with, they've mentioned that they were enrolled with the free services for NSA, but they also was encouraged to purchase like additional infrastructure or hardware to support maybe more of the advanced services. I let them know like they didn't necessarily need the advanced services for the level of 800-171 they need to comply with.
We are not charging companies for any components of our service, and we don't have any plans to change that in the future.
Okay, so yeah, sound like that was just maybe a misunderstanding, misinterpretation.
Yeah.
Confirm, heard it directly from Bailey. It's free. Free means free.
Thank you.
Do y'all have like an SLA as far as when they enroll? Like, how long does that typically take?
It can be fairly quickly based off of the responsiveness of the party on the other end. So every partnership is going to be underpinned by a non-disclosure agreement. And, the NDA says, we're both going to protect the information being shared. Folks can indicate on the NDA, I want PDNS, I want threat intelligence collaboration, I want all three services. So that's really important. We've had folks sign that and get that back to us in 15 minutes. We've had other folks say, hey, I want to have a technical conversation between my network defenders and your providers or your vulnerability analysts, or my lawyer wants to talk to your lawyer. And so we're happy to have all of those more in-depth conversations with the company if that's what they want. But generally, it's a very quick and easy process. And I think the other important thing to note is that with these services, we are using third-party contracted providers. So like, for example, NSA is not at its heart a secure DNS provider, right? So we've contracted out with the company that provides secure DNS. And so once a DIB, small to medium-sized business, comes in, they've signed that NDA, we're going to pass them to our partners that are going to actually enroll them in the service and help them, make those slight configurations that they need to do so.
Okay. And as far as the collaboration, as you mentioned, if they want to involve their MSP, MSSP, or attorney, how does that work? Those individuals or companies would just need to sign an NDA as well and be brought in under?
Yep. We have a lot of small businesses that say, hey, here's my MSP. Can you share information with them on my behalf? And so we'll just have both parties sign that NDA, and then it's easy to go from there. The other thing that I guess I didn't mention, when we talk about threat intelligence collaboration, we have secure communications channels with our companies where they're just able to reach out to us from their phone. And I think that's so valuable and it's so easy. And that's something that the community really appreciate. NSA, I think you were kind of saying it earlier, it's big, it's been a little spooky at times, but through this program, these companies can literally pick up their phone and talk to an NSA analyst or a relationship manager. And I think that's really key. And it's truly that easy. Even though I said there wasn't an easy button earlier, this part is easy.
You make components of it easy.
Yeah, we try.
That's good. Yeah, certainly. I like the idea of just streamlining it as much as possible and making it as straightforward as possible. You mentioned that CMMC is still currently in the rulemaking phase. Once it does become a final rule and those, let's say, CMMC level 2 assessments are underway, will the NSA help provide any evidence for companies that are using your services to show that they do meet those practices that you outlined?
Yeah, that's something that we're looking at. Obviously, we have SOPs and SLAs and all of that underpin everything we do. We have a lot of documentation. And so we're working through what we could provide versus what the company could provide. For example, within attack surface management, companies are monthly getting reports from NSA that show, the results of their vulnerability scan. That report is between NSA and the company. So we're thinking through, is that something that the company could provide to the assessor and those types of things. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So in addition to doing podcasts, LinkedIn, conferences, what are some other ways that the NSA is getting the word out about your services? And I also mentioned I did attend a webinar. So y'all did a public webinar. So I know that you all are active in the community.
Yeah. One thing I'll say that I'm super excited about is we just did ads in magazines. That these magazines cater obviously to the defense community. It's not like we're putting things in fashion magazines. Although I do think that would be cool.
Vogue or Chanel.
But we're really trying to meet the community where they live. So, like, what is the DIB reading? Who are their consultants? What conferences are they going to? And then we're just trying to make sure we have a presence there so it's as easy as possible for them. But the other thing is we want to make sure we're strategic, right? And so we're really working closely with the services, with the different combatant commands to say who are your priority contractors, whether it's supporting a sensitive program or there's been a significant monetary investment, or they make a component of a system that's critical to war fighting. Who are your priorities? And then we will aggressively, maybe not aggressively, might not be the right word. We're very friendly, but we'll reach out to those companies and say, hey, because you're supporting this critical DoD program, you're eligible to receive cybersecurity assistance from the NSA. So we definitely take that broad approach, but we also try to be very strategic and prioritized as well.
What challenges do you all encounter as far as trying to let people know about these free services and the contractors? It seems surprising because I know that's a common complaint I hear from defense contractors. It's too expensive. But now we do have agencies like NSA or CISA providing free services. Are you encountering any challenges?
We're definitely welcomed with open arms, but I will tell you what the challenge is. And it's just getting people to take action. Like, people hear this, they think it's great. They're like, oh, I need to talk to my IT guy about that, or I need to flag it for my CISO, or, oh, I need to fill out that form. And then they don't. And that is our biggest challenge. An incident can be really, really costly to not only your company, but to the Department of Defense. And so if I could just leave everybody with one thing, it's like, just take one small step today, go to nsa.gov/CCC, fill out the form, and then we'll work with you from there. But it will take 90 seconds of your time, and it is a significant investment in your network hygiene. So that's always the challenge.
Yeah, from the consulting side, I take the same approach where just take one step. That's going to improve your cybersecurity hygiene. How to eat an elephant one bite at a time. That's certainly with cybersecurity.
Yeah, and sometimes companies don't really know where to start, and I think they get overwhelmed, and I totally get it. I mean, the first time I read NIST 800-171, I was like, I need to take a minute, and I read it again and again. And, I think that people just feel overwhelmed. And when they feel overwhelmed, they don't do anything. And that's the exact opposite reaction that we need people to have. So yeah, just taking that step. And then I think the other thing I would say, and maybe I'm saying this to a smaller audience, but I think it's important, a lot of people don't feel super comfortable with cybersecurity as a topic. And I think they're embarrassed to ask questions and they're intimidated to dig in deep and learn it. And don't be. Like, it's all very doable. You can learn it. You can ask questions that you might think are stupid. We will answer any question that you have, whether you need it in that like very high level language, or if you do have a network defense team that's wanting to go deep and have more of that technical deep dive into everything. We're here to help, so don't be afraid to ask for what you need.
Yeah, I like that. And certainly the theme of this interview is NSA is friendly. I'll definitely take that theme away.
I like to think so.
Very awesome. Now, a lot of our listeners are in the higher ed space that kind of focus on supporting those research universities. Can you talk to some unique challenges or threats that research universities are facing or should be aware of, and how you all can support research universities?
It's an interesting question, but I wouldn't say that the threat, facing research universities are different than the threats facing the DIB or different than the threats facing anybody. All of these malicious cyber actors are going to use what they can to exploit their victims. And that's generally, we're seeing the same things over and over again: exploitation of internet-facing vulnerabilities, use of DNS, etc. So I don't think I can give you a answer that's specific to that audience. What I will say, something we haven't talked about yet, though, is if folks don't have an active DoD contract, but they just think, hey, maybe it would be nice to know what NSA knows, we do publish cybersecurity guidance, mitigations guidance on nsa.gov/cyber. So when we have something that we think will be actionable for the community writ large, to the fullest extent that we can, we're getting that information out the door in a way that's public and broad.
Fantastic.
One thing I'd like to do is talk a little bit more about PDNS and attack surface management, just for folks that might be like, what is that? If you already know, just tune out here. Thanks for staying with us this long. PDNS, protective DNS, again, I said we're blocking users from connecting to those known malicious or suspicious domains. What we're doing, what our contractor is doing, is they're really just running those queries through threat feeds, whether it's commercial threat intelligence, but also NSA is providing IOCs that are derived from our sensitive sources, NSA analytics, tips from other partners, right? So we're able to actually make that threat feed really robust and protect against the emerging malicious cyber activity that we're seeing, because we're weekly updating that block list. So just wanted to get a little bit more into the details there if folks are like, okay, but what am I actually getting? And it's very simple. You can work with our contractors, tech folks, to ensure your DNS queries are running through their filter. And then there's a dashboard where you can say, okay, I actually want to make this a little less restrictive, or I want to make it more restrictive, etc. Now, attack surface management, this is really threefold, but I think each part of this provides unique value. So what we're trying to do here is help companies prioritize and understand all of their assets out there so they can then better protect it. So the first step of what we do is asset inventory, and we're really using commercial capabilities to say, okay, what can we see out there on the open internet about this DIB company? And the reason being is because if our analysts can see it using commercially acquired capabilities, our adversaries can see it, and they may have already found it, So we're really helping companies inventory their assets. And the other reason why this is key is because in the DIB, there's a lot of mergers and acquisitions. So companies are inheriting risk that sometimes they don't even know about. So once we've done that asset inventory, we then do vulnerability scans across those assets. And this is interesting, vulnerability scans are great. They're very comprehensive, as they should be. But if you're a small business and you have one person doing your IT, it can be very challenging to action, an 80-page to 1,000-page report, right? Depending on how many assets you have. And so
I've seen those reports.
Yeah, they showed me one, and I was like, oh, I understand. This makes it real. It's a lot, And so we take those comprehensive reports and we then do our own analysis on it and say, okay, based off what's been discovered in this customer's environment, which vulnerabilities are actively being exploited by nation state actors or by ransomware crews or whomever. We then will write, an executive summary that says, maybe we found 30 issues, but these are the 5 issues that you really need to fix today because this actor is exploiting it. And in every case that we can, we're including that attribution so that folks have context to know this is why I need to act. But then the final piece of it is something we call breaking exploitation alerting, which is calling back to earlier 175 publicly known vulnerabilities. That's quick and easy for actors to use. So when we see a vulnerability go from known to being exploited, we're instantly looking in our data lake to say which one of our customers is vulnerable to this. Are they running that technology product that has this hole inside of it? And when we see that, within hours, we're able to get that company on the phone and say, hey, maybe we told you about this hole in your environment 6 months ago, but as of today, it's being exploited by this group, and so you really need to fix it. And so those notifications are wildly popular, and we have proof that because of them, customers are finding and fixing things prior to compromising that data exfil.
Yeah, really valuable services. Are there any times where NSA may see threat intelligence that an actual company is being targeted specifically and y'all will notify that company?
Yeah, so we work really closely with the FBI, with CISA, NSA as a whole. If we have actionable intelligence that we're able to get out there, we're not going to sit on it. We're going to work through any interagency partner that we need to make sure we're able to share.
Awesome. You mentioned attribution states. Are there any nation states that are more active than others as far as targeting defense contractors?
Certainly, there's a lot out there about, the People's Republic of China, how they target the DIB and, steal our intellectual property to build their own, military and economy off of. But really, you can't just hone in on one threat, unfortunately. Russia is also very active. But the other thing that I think is important to talk about for the DIB specifically is ransomware groups groups because sadly, ransomware really disproportionately impacts small businesses, which the majority of the defense industrial base is. So there's certainly a lot of different threat actors out there with different motivations, but unfortunately, you can't say like this is the only one you need to worry about.
Threats that come from all different directions.
Yeah.
Right. That was going to be my next question about ransomware. Are any of the services that NSA offers the DIB will help them defend against ransomware attacks?
Absolutely. So both PDNS and attack surface management, our protective domain name system has actually blocked activity associated with ransomware groups, as well as like nation state spear phishing, botnet, malware, but also attack surface management. A lot of ransomware groups, again, are just using these publicly known internet-facing vulnerabilities. Our attack surface management helps with that as well.
You mentioned something that's really important, just kind of one of the foundations of cybersecurity is that the asset inventory. Can you talk more as far as how does the NSA help organizations identify their assets and with inheritance as far as inheriting risk from mergers, acquisitions? Can you elaborate a little more on that? Because I just know asset inventory is so huge and so many companies don't even know what assets they have.
Yeah, so we're simply using a suite of commercially acquired capabilities where we can essentially start in the dark and just plug in a company's name into that tool and then see what we find on the open internet. We use a suite of tools to make sure that we're not missing anything and to actually get them the most comprehensive inventory possible. So it's pretty simple.
All right. So like you said, if those are tools you all use, those are also tools that the threat actors are using as well. So it's good to have that visibility. You referenced NSA analysts actually performing the work, but also using collaborative partners to perform like the DNS servers. How does that work, that collaboration? Where is the information coming from?
We contract out for protective DNS. That's a contract that NSA has established with a DNS provider. For attack surface management, we have acquired the commercial capabilities through contract, but the information is actually coming from NSA analysts. So we have NSA relationship managers and analysts that are in the communications channel talking to the company saying, hey, here's what we found, here's some mitigations, guidance, et cetera. That applies to threat intelligence collaboration as well.
Well, Bailey, you've given us a lot of great information as we get ready to wrap up this interview. Are there any topics that I haven't covered that you want to talk about or share? Any other
I think
goodies you have for the DIB?
No, this has been awesome. I think just thank you for the opportunity. We're constantly trying to get the word out through, trusted third parties like yourself that have these community ties. I guess the final two things I'd say is we're partners, we're here to help, but it takes you taking action. And so, to just make sure that when you turn this podcast off, maybe you're driving, so don't do it right now. But today, before you lay your head down on the pillow, if you have a DoD contract, if you're a small business, fill out that form so that we can work together.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Bailey, for being so generous with your time.
Yeah.
I know being the chief of the DIB, you have a lot of obligations.
I find this fun, and I love anytime I get to talk and meet people. So just thank you for the opportunity.
Fantastic.
If you receive value from this episode, I invite you to subscribe and like so that you're the first to know when we release new episodes. Also, check out CMMCproof.com to learn more about the arsenal of resources that we provide to equip you to conquer CMMC. We'll see you next time.